Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Damascus lost the war against the people of Syria a long time ago, and Damascus does not control Syria anymore. The Free Syrian Army defeated Damascus, and the people of Damascus would have continued to defeat Damascus' control over Syria, but they were stopped. Damascus was not able to get control over Syria until Iran came and helped him. So Iran is responsible for the Damascus continuing to control parts of Syria. Iran is doing this. So it's as if Iran it's having control and power over Syria. And Russia also has been very important to Damascus having control over any part of Syria. So what is the interest of Iran and Russia in Syria? Why are Iran and Russia controlling parts of Syria? Why do Iran and Russia need to control parts of Syria? The war in Ukraine has two very big things moving him. There's two very big important things that are important to all of the world that are moving inside the war in Ukraine. And it's not very clear to many people. So the war in Ukraine, it's happening very much like the war in Syria. The same acts, and the things that happen to the people in Syria are happening to the people in Ukraine now. So in Ukraine, the war started on February 24th, 2022 in Ukraine, where Russia began to do blitzkrieg through cities in the Ukraine. And they focused around the northeast of Ukraine, where the oil fields are in Ukraine. Ukraine is very important. And Russia is supplying most of the gas to Europe. There are two big companies in Russia that are so powerful and important for Russia: the Rosneft and the Gazprom. The Rosneft is controlling 40% of Russia's gas or oil. And the Gazprom, it's controlling 12% of the world gas supply. It's supplying mostly to Europe. In the last week, Russia stopped gas to 5 different countries in Europe. And Russia has invaded the oil fields in Ukraine. So now Europe has a big gas problem, a big problem of where to get gas. So the war started on February 24, and it is now the end of June. It's starting in July. So this is 4 months, and there were 4,700 civilians killed and 5,900 civilians injured, wounded, hurt. So that would be around 11,000 people now have their bodies or their life, they're dead, or their bodies are severely hurt. There is 2.5 million refugees in Europe, and there is 4,300,000 refugees in Poland. So the people from Ukraine, in 4 months, there are 7 million people. 7 million people of Ukraine have gone out. It's Ukraine. It's a little bigger than Syria, and they have 7 million people that in 4 months have completely left the country. This is an incredible amount of people that are moving, and it's essential for them to move out because the blitzkrieg and the actions of the Russian army or the other groups working with Russia have shown how dangerous it is, and that how essential it is for people to move out of the places when the Russian army moves into the city. So this is very much like Syria was in the start, where there was millions of people moving out, and there were crimes against humanity being used in the city in order to motivate the people to move out. So the information we have is that there are 12,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed and 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers hurt in 4 months. And this must just be an incredible battles happening, and we're not seeing it on video and in images. We're not seeing it. And we have something that we did not have, a technology that's so powerful that we did not have in World War II, and that is the internet. Everyone has the capability to produce video and audio and images. So this is incredible communication. There is 16,000 Russians killed and 35,000 Russians hurt. And we're unsure of they're unsure of whether it's true or not. The numbers of prisoners of war. There are expectedly 2,000 prisoners of war in Russia that were taken out of Mariupol. And the Mariupol was an encirclement. And it's very important that there were 2,500 Ukrainian soldiers in the city Mariupol who were encircled and who have been taken as prisoners of war by an army that does crimes against humanity. And that's using words like terrorist, which we know is used to take away all of the human rights and to disappear people. And then in Donbass, where Russia invaded, there is claims of 8,000 prisoners of war there, Ukrainian soldiers that were taken as prisoners of war. So there's possibly 10,000 prisoners of war being taken by Russia, which is an incredible amount of prisoners of war to be being taken. And that Russia likes to, does not like to take prisoners. They don't like to take prisoners. So that is actually remarkable that there would be 10,000 prisoners of war. The Russians did an attack on outskirts of the city of Kiev, which is the capital city of Ukraine. They did a big attack around the outskirts of the capital city, which is far from the oil fields. The oil fields are on the northeast of Ukraine, and this is essential for Russia in its economic fight against Europe, because it supplies all of the gas to Europe. Taking those oil fields from Ukraine gave Russia an absolute monopoly over the, and kind of took, it was like a kind of surprise attack economically to Europe, because they did not have time to find alternate supply. They depended on the Russian gas, and if they were trying to take Ukrainian gas, now those oil fields are under Russian control. So Russia did an attack on very far from the oil fields on the capital city, Kiev, and then it withdrew. When it did this attack, it was in March, and it was remarkable the activity that Russia managed in the city, on the outskirts of the capital city, in a place named Busha. In Busha, what it appears is the Wagner group, because we know, or we heard rumors that there were 400 Wagner group security services, and that they had a list of officials to kill or capture, probably kill. I believe it was a kill list, and they were on the outskirts, but then they withdrew. And what they did. What they did do there was Busha, the massacres in Busha, which was where the army, or the Wagner group, whoever it was, the Russian forces came into the city. They went door to door looking for any man that was age 18 years old to 50 years old. They brought these men out of the house. They would bind their hands behind their backs with zip ties, and then they would do mass executions on the streets by a gunshot to the back of the head. They would lock families in basements and interrogate them, and they would do other different war crimes where they were looking to execute all military-aged men in the city, around the city. And then they ultimately retreated after several weeks out of the area of Kiev. And at that time was when they finished encircling the city Mariupol down on the port of the Black Sea. And now at this time, they have encircled a city to the north, Severodonetsk. And it's very much like Mariupol, where there is thousands of soldiers that are Ukrainian soldiers that have been encircled now in the city that didn't know to withdraw ahead of time. And we would expect that it is the rights of the men who serve in the Ukrainian army that someone will break that siege and to bring them out, because the army is one functioning unit, and you don't just they need to work as one functioning unit, and that all of the resources of the army should be brought to bear for them, because they are being brought to bear for the whole as a resource of the entire army. So the oil, it's very important about the war in Ukraine. And now that the Severodonetsk is being encircled, NATO, and now that much of the oil fields are under the control, and that the last week Russia has cut the gas supply to 5 countries in Europe. Europe has a huge crisis of oil starting last week. And NATO has built up 300,000 forces. It's just breaking the news in the last couple of days. NATO has brought 300,000 forces to the borders of Ukraine. There is a second major important element of this crisis in Ukraine, and that we in Syria need to separate ourselves from, and that is the food crisis. We need to separate ourselves from that. If there is going to be a war in Europe, it doesn't need to involve us. The Russians are brothers with Ukraine, and it's brothers with Europe. And as to why Russia had come down to Syria is connected to Iran, because Iran came first to help Assyria, and then it's connected to, and Russia is now connecting itself to China and India. And when you see how connected the food is, the second biggest element of the war in Ukraine, then you'll know why Russia wants to come to Syria, and how important if Damascus needs to have Iran and Russia to live, and when it doesn't have them, then Damascus will fall. The food, the wheat in Ukraine. The now Ukraine, Europe's wheat, it looks like Europe's wheat. It comes from Ukraine, Germany, and France. Germany, France, and Ukraine produce a lot of wheat. Russia produces a lot of wheat. China and India produce the most wheat in the world, and Turkey produces a small amount of wheat. United States produces half of the wheat that India does. So when Russia and China align against France and Germany, and when Ukraine's wheat stops to Europe, the wheat to Europe will need to come from Germany and France. And there is, so that puts a lot of pressure. They already have a problem with the oil prices now in Europe. So when they have a problem with the food, now Europe has an oil and a food problem. And those are meaning that Europe is going to be completely brought to bear. Now there is now what's essential is that India and China have maybe 1/3 of the world's wheat supply, for bread, and bread is an essential food. People eat mostly bread. And if China were to separate itself in trade-wise, or to stop supplying the wheat to the world, then it would make a huge supply problem, because people are not prepared to feed themselves in their own countries, or they the way that their trade system works in the country is so that it's depending on food from the outside. So those people are very vulnerable if China stops selling wheat to the world. In this past month, India, who is the second biggest producer of wheat in the world, did stop. India banned wheat export. India and China present 1/3 of the world's wheat supply. In the last month, India's banned wheat export, so we will not be getting this supply from India. And China is threatening that they would take away their supply. That would be 1/3 of the world's wheat supply. The next biggest producer is Russia and the United States. Russia produces almost as much wheat as India. So if Russia, India, and China decide that they are aligning themselves against the Western Hemisphere in economic ties and global trade of wheat, then it would mean a food crisis for the Western Hemisphere. It would have a huge economic pull on it. And if they take Ukraine as well, with Ukraine's 25 million tons of grain a year, if they take that too, which they have prevented the movement of grain, so that would just be almost 50% of the world's wheat supply is going to be stopped to the Western Hemisphere because of the war in Ukraine and the alignment of India and China behind Russia. So in the past 2 weeks, the President of the United States is trying to make a plan and to support Europe to help rebalance the problem of the crisis with the oil and the food. And he said that the NATO or the United States is going to cooperate in building temporary grain silos for the 6 million tons of wheat and the 15 million tons of corn, the 1-year supply of 25 million tons of wheat and corn trapped in Ukraine. Because of the war, they said that they cannot bring it out on the ships through the Black Sea like they normally would, because Russia has blockaded the Black Sea and threatened to bomb them out of the water. So they're going to build temporary silos on the border of Ukraine and Poland, and they're going to use the train and the railways to move grain from Ukraine to Poland. Allahu Akbar.